Hello and welcome to the latest video on my top 1000 countdown. This video, following on from earlier, we are going 260 down to 251. So let us go to the first fighter now. Fighter number 260, and that fighter is a fighter I've spoke of a number of times, a very underrated middleweight contender called Jack McCarron. Now, Jack McCarron, beat one world champion. He fought 76 rounds against champions, and this unknown middleweight contender beat 5 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 110 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, McCarron had 4 fights against rated fighters. He was a pre-rating era fighter, so therefore heavily limited number. You'll obviously learn more about his full resume breakdown when I do his career video. But McCarron scored 28 knockouts, 9 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and won in the first round. McCarron was top 10 rated for 0 years, being a pre-rating era fighter, and he had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 26 fights. Now, Jack McCarron was pound for pound rated for 0 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that came to 26 fights in total. Now, McCarron was pound for pound rated for 0 years, and he had 16 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 6 wins. He scored 3 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters, and 1 win against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Jack McCarron's opposition fought rate comes in at 9 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 5 from 13. So McCarron had 9 fights against champions, including 1 win, 5 loss, 3 draws with 0 knockouts. McCarron had 14 fights against Hall of Famers, including 5 wins, 7 loss, 2 draw with 0 knockouts. And Jack McCarron, like many fighters, had no world title fights. So on to fighter 259, he's one of Britain's unsung heroes. I always say he's one of Britain's unsung heroes, the excellent Peter Kane. Now, Peter Kane, beat 2 world champions. He fought 46 rounds against champions, and he beat no Hall of Fame fighters, also fighting 25 rounds against Hall of Famers in his career. Now, Peter Kane had a massive number of fights against rated fighters, coming in with a total of 46, making him one of the highest scorers from the UK in that category. He scored 54 knockouts, 25 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 7 knockouts in the first round. Now, Peter Kane was top 10 rated for a total of 9 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 42 fights. Peter Kane was pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings for 1 year, and he had 2 fights against pound for pounders, but scored no wins in 3 pound for pound categories. And his opposition fought rate was 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. So Peter Kane had 5 fights against champions. That includes 2 wins, 2 loss, 1 draw with 0 knockouts. He had 2 fights against Hall of Famers, including no wins, 1 loss, 1 draw with 0 knockouts. And Peter Kane had 5 world title fights, winning 3, losing 2 with 0 draws and 2 title defences. So there is the excellent Peter Kane there. When we go on to fighter 258, it is an unsung hero of Puerto Rican boxing fame, Pedro Montañez, a Hall of Famer. Now, Pedro Montañez beat 4 world champions. He fought 51 rounds against champions, and he also beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 40 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Pedro Montañez had 22 fights against rated fighters, and he scored 51 knockouts, 31 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 7 in the first round. Now, Pedro Montañez was top 10 rated for 4 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 50 fights. He was pound for pound rated for 1 year in my all-time rankings, and Montañez had 7 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 4 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters, and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Pedro Montañez's opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So Montañez had 6 fights against champions, including 4 wins, 2 losses, no draws, with 2 knockouts. He had 5 fights against Hall of Famers, including 3 wins, 2 loss, no draw, with 2 knockouts. And Pedro Montañez had 2 world title fights. Both of them were defeats, but he was a very, very good fighter indeed. So from Pedro Montañez, we go to fighter 257, to long reigning featherweight champion Eusebio Pedrosa. Now, Pedrosa beat 6 world champions. He fought 115 rounds against champions, and he beat one Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 27 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Pedrosa had 18 fights against pound-for-pound rated fighters, and he scored 25 knockouts, 5 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 3 knockouts in the first round. Now, Pedrosa was top 10 rated for a total of 11 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 25 fights. He was pound-for-pound rated for 2 years in my all-time rankings, and Pedrosa had 5 fights against pound-for-pounders, scoring 3 wins. He scored 1 win against a pound-for-pound top 3 fighter and 0 wins against pound-for-pound number 1 fighters. And Eusebio Pedrosa's opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. So, Pedrosa had 9 fights against champions, including 7 wins, 2 losses, no draws, with 3 knockouts. He had 2 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 1 loss, no draw, with 1 knockout. And Eusebio Pedrosa had 22 world title fights, including 19 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, and 19 title defences. So, Eusebio Pedrosa 257, fighter 256, okay, is former world champion Johnny Bratton. Now, Johnny Bratton beat 1 world champion. He fought 110 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter, fighting 100 rounds against Hall of Famers. Now, in terms of fights against rated fighters, Johnny Bratton comes in with a total of 42 fights. He scored 34 knockouts, 16 in 3 rounds or less, and 3 in the first round. Johnny Bratton was top 10 rated for a total of 8 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 10 fights. Now, he was pound-for-pound rated for 2 years in my all-time rankings, and Johnny Bratton had 20 fights against pound-for-pounders, scoring 6 wins. He scored 3 wins against pound-for-pound top 3 fighters and 1 win against pound-for-pound number 1 fighters. And Johnny Bratton's opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. So Bratton had 11 fights against champions, including 1 win, 9 loss, 1 draw, with 1 knockout. He had 10 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 8 loss, 1 draw, with 1 knockout. And Bratton had 3 world title fights, including 1 win, 2 loss, no draw, and 0 title defences. So there's Johnny Bratton in 256. When we go to fighter 255, okay, was Japan's greatest fighter. Now, until Naoya Inoue retires, okay, I'm not going to unveil if Inoue has overtaken fighting Harada, because that wouldn't be fair. People who follow my old channel know that Inoue had moved into 2nd place and was chasing down Harada, but Inoue's been active since then, and he's accomplished more and done more since then. But you know, I'm afraid it will have to wait until Inoue retires before I unveil where he rates. Big shout out to Bruce in the chat. I was just listening to Miles Davis' song, Johnny Bratton. Miles Davis. I don't know much about that genre, but I know that name, and I know he's a legendary figure in that genre. So, yeah, fantastic. So, fighting Harada. Okay, 2-weight champion at flyweight and bantamweight. Beat 3 world champions. Harada fought 106 rounds against champions, and he beat 2 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 56 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And what you're looking at here in fighting Harada, to the right with the dark trunks on, is the only fighter who defeated the great Brazilian fighter Eder Joffre, the great bantamweight fighter and former featherweight champion. Eder Joffre only lost 2 fights in his whole career, both of them to fighting Harada, giving you an idea of how good Harada was. So Harada beat 2 Hall of Fame fighters individually. He fought 56 rounds against Hall of Famers, and he had 20 fights against rated fighters. Harada scored 22 knockouts, 11 in 3 rounds or less, and 2 in the first round. And Harada was top 10 rated for 8 years. Now, he had a longest unbeaten run that ran to 25 fights, and fighting Harada was pound-for-pound rated for 2 years. Now, against pound-for-pounders, Harada had 7 fights, including 3 wins. He scored 0 wins against pound-for-pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound-for-pound number 1 fighters. And fighting Harada's opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 2 from 13. So Harada had 8 fights against champions, including 4 wins, 4 loss, no draw, with 1 knockout. He had 4 fights against Hall of Famers, including 3 wins, 1 loss, no draw, with 1 knockout. And Harada had 10 world title fights, including 6 wins, 4 losses, no draws, and 4 title defences. But of course, Harada fought in the unified belt era, not the multiple alphabet era now, etc., etc. So there's Harada, okay, who was and is, until Inoue retires and joins my rankings, the greatest Japanese fighter of all time in my rankings. So on to fighter number 254, okay, it's to explosive puncher, the Libreville Shadow, the giant 6'4" puncher George Godfrey. Now George Godfrey beat 3 world champions, he fought 64 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter, fighting 23 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now George Godfrey had 15 fights against rated fighters, and he scored a massive 81 knockouts. He scored an equally massive, well, not equal to 81, but an equally impressive number of 52 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, also scoring 17 first round wins. Now George Godfrey was top 10 rated for 6 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 22 fights. Now Godfrey was never pound for pound rated himself in my all-time rankings. He had 4 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 1 win. He scored 1 win against a pound for pound top 3 fighter and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And George Godfrey's opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. Yeah, sorry Martin, I said between 8 and 9, but I'm doing it now so I can type up another video. The last video I did was 60 to 51, so I'm close. So everything now is about getting those videos typed up, and then these videos will come quicker than what they are now. So George Godfrey had 11 fights against champions, including 4 wins, 6 loss, 1 draw, with 2 knockouts. He had 5 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 3 loss, 1 draw, with 0 knockouts. And he had 8 world title fights, including 6 wins, 2 loss, no draw, and 4 title defences. So there is George Godfrey in 254. When we go to fighter 253, okay, is former world champion Harry Jeffra. Now Harry Jeffra beat 5 world champions. He fought 175 rounds against champions, and Jeffra beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter, fighting 70 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Jeffra had a total of 29 fights against rated opponents, and he scored 28 knockouts, 16 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 6 knockouts in the first round. Jeffra was top 10 rated for a total of 7 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 26 fights. Now Jeffra was pound for pound rated for 0 years in my all-time rankings. He had 3 fights against pound for pounders, but scored no wins in the 3 pound for pound categories, and his opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. Yeah, Martin, it's funny, Paul's not here at the moment, okay, but Paul, he's been following the opposition fought rate, and we had a 9 in this one, okay, belonging to the excellent middleweight contender Jack McCarron, who kicked off the video. But yeah, I did one earlier that was it an 11 or a 12 on one of the videos I were doing. So yeah. So, Harry Jeffra, okay, opposition fought rate 4 from 18, opposition beat rate 3 from 13. He had 15 fights against champions, including 9 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw, with 0 knockouts. He had 7 fights against Hall of Famers, including 4 wins, 3 loss, no draw, with 0 knockouts. And Harry Jeffra had a total of 6 world title fights, splitting that record into 3 wins, 3 losses, making 1 title defence. So 2 fighters to go, people. Okay, I'm going to try and do 3 videos tomorrow, if I can. So Harry Jeffra, 253. When we go to 252, okay, is the excellent middleweight to heavyweight Joe Choinski. Now, Joe Choinski beat 4 world champions, okay, for 89 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 98 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Of course, Joe Choinski from Jack Johnson fame, where when he fought Johnson, when he threw a certain punch, Johnson dropped one of his arms. So Choinski threw punch, Johnson dropped his arm, Choinski followed up and laid Jack Johnson out, timed it and laid him out. And then, of course, advised Johnson on footwork, balance, etc., etc., defence. So Troyanski had 0 fights against rated fighters, being a pre-rating era fighter. He scored 40 knockouts, including 24 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 3 in the first round. Troyanski was top 10 rated for 0 years, being a pre-rating era fighter, and his longest unbeaten run was a run of 26 fights. Now, Troyanski was pound for pound rated for 3 years, and he had a total of 22 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 5 wins. He scored 1 win against a pound for pound top 3 fighter and 1 win against a pound for pound number 1 fighter. And Joe Troyanski's opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. So Troyanski had 13 fights against champions, including 5 wins, 4 loss, 4 draw, with 4 knockouts. He had 13 fights against Hall of Famers, including 1 win, 8 loss, 4 draw, with 1 knockout. And Joe Troyanski had 0 world title fights. So that's 9 of the 10 fighters down. Also, on another note, just another little drop point in here. I've created a new scoring system for me top 1,000. As I've mentioned, I've now already scored just past the 200 fighter mark. So I've already scored just more than 200 fighters. So that rescoring is going quickly, and it's really changing the game up. It's really mixing things up. I'm thinking in some ways the ratings will be more concise. There'll be less of the rate. There'll still be some things I don't agree with, but from the look of it initially, I'll have to see as it builds and grows. When there's 500 or 600 more in there, or 500 or 600 in total, then I'll have a better idea. But it's already looking like it's partially dealing with some of these irritating things where a fighter places somewhere where I rate him higher, but for some reason for the reasons he's rated is lower. It kind of combats that. So I think it's going to reduce the amount of fighters I don't agree with in the ratings. So, we'll see as it grows. So, on to fighter 251, fighter 10 of this video, okay? And that fighter is a fighter I mentioned the other day, okay? People say there were no Russians in boxing until end of Cold War, 1991 or 1990. No, Newsboy Brown's parents fled Russia, and he grew up in the United States. So Newsboy Brown, okay, never became world champion, but he is one of the great flyweight fighters. Newsboy Brown beat 6 world champions, okay, he fought 125 rounds against champions. And Newsboy Brown beat 5 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 100 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Newsboy Brown had 39 fights against rated fighters, and he scored 14 knockouts, 7 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. Now, Newsboy Brown was top 10 rated for 7 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that run to 37 fights. Now, he was never pound for pound rated in my all-time ratings. He came close a few years in the top 15, but just couldn't break into top 10. Okay, but what I found, another little drop point is, what I found doing the yearly pound for pound rankings is many flyweights did fantastically well. But they just weren't doing the same as what the welterweights, middleweights and heavyweights were doing, for example, and the lightweights. They were doing great work, but there were many welterweights, middleweights, lightweights, heavyweights who were just outworking them or scoring better in the criteria. So it wasn't that the flyweights were... That's why many flyweights or bantamweights, they don't have as many fights against pound pounders, because they're fighting in a division where not as many of them qualified as pound pounders due to that fact. It's an interesting little factoid. Middleweight's not affected by that, welterweight's not affected by that, nor is heavyweight, but flyweight is, and sometimes to an extent bantamweight is, unless those bantamweights have jumped to featherweight and then lightweight, etc. It's just an interesting little tone I found going through my pound for pound ratings when I was doing them year to year. So anyway, Newsboy Brown, okay, he had 8 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 4 wins. He scored 0 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Newsboy Brown's opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. So Newsboy Brown had 14 fights against champions, including 7 wins, 5 loss, 2 draw, with 0 knockouts. He had 10 fights against Hall of Famers with 6 wins. From his 10 fights against Hall of Famers, he only lost 2 of them. Okay, he also had 2 draws with 0 knockouts, and Newsboy Brown had 1 title fight that was a defeat. But to me, this is just my opinion. When you look at Jimmy Wild's resume with Tansy Lee and Joe Lynch and Pancho Villa and a number of those bigger fighters he fought beat him, he beat a few of them as well. You look at his resume, he has other good fighters on there. Does Jimmy Wild's resume better Newsboy Brown? I think that's a hard thing to push. Certainly Jimmy Wild's got a better knockout record. Certainly Jimmy Wild was lineal champion from 1916-1923 until Villa ripped the title from him in aggressive fashion. But at the end of the day, you know, the title thing is not the only thing. When you go to the resume, it becomes much harder for Jimmy Wild to outshine Newsboy Brown, as you will see when both Wild and Newsboy Brown have their career videos done. So there is Newsboy Brown. He ends the video 260, 251. More videos coming tomorrow. I will do 2. I'm going to try and do 3. I'll see how I go. My videos are nearly typed up. So once my videos are typed up, one day you may come on and I've done 6 in a day. It just depends on time. But yeah, they're going to come thicker and faster. Because once that's done, I can chill out and just do the career videos. Yeah. My graph videos and rescoring my top 1,000. That to me is chilling. Anyway, guys in chat, take care. I'm out for the day. Back tomorrow. I'm Boxing Librarian. I'm out for now.